week, 2021. I'm going to welcome our guest here for you today, Dallas Campbell. I could go on and on and on about all of the amazing and not so amazing things
I think you should. I think you should go on.
No. Everyone could just Google. It's all there for you. So, without further ado, Dallas, if you'd like to share your screen. Everybody, if you could please mute your mic. Thanks. I can't see anybody who's got those. Okay, Dallas, over to you.
Hey, well, nice. Thanks, Tracy. Thank you very much for having me on your OU Space Club, and welcome freshers. I can't imagine what it's like to be a fresher in 2020 or 2021, but I hope whatever you are doing, you're having a nice time. It's nice to see. I'm seeing a few people here. Philip Lawrence looks like he's having a nice time there. He looks like he's having a good time. Yes, thumbs up there. Well, thanks for having me. I wasn't sure what to sort of talk about really tonight, other than, obviously space. I wrote a book a couple of years ago, well, 2017 actually, so 3 years ago, 17, 18, 19, 20, well, 3 years ago it came out. So I thought I thought I might talk a little bit about that, and I put together a few slides and a few thoughts. The book, can you all see me still? Can you? I don't know.
Yes,
what you
we
can see. So this is the book that I wrote, and it's really, basically, it was just a collection of slightly arcane space stories that people have forgotten about, but which I found rather interesting. So it's a kind of slightly alternative history of, and I guess a slightly more unusual history of human space flight. But the reason I wrote it, the inspiration came from another book, really. Well, actually, Illustrated Guide to Leaving the Planet. As a sort of title, actually, I actually stole from a Douglas Adams piece. There was a Douglas Adams piece in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. He wrote a 5-point plan about how to leave the planet, and if you do X, Y, and Z, then that'll work. There was actually a book that I had when I was a kid, which is this one, called Show Me the World of Space Travel, which came out in 1959. I wasn't alive, but this book was kind of hanging around my house. And I lost it, but I actually found it in a secondhand bookshop, and I went through it again. I just fell in love with it, mainly the kind of the sort of crazy illustrations inside, and it just sort of reminded me how joyful sort of books can be. So I wanted to write a book that was kind of fun and interesting and have facts in. And I was thinking, like, I should point out that I'm not an academic. I know there'll be a few academics here, and you're all studying to be academics. But my main, I'm going to go to share screen now. So when I go to share screen, I won't be able to see any of you guys. So Tracy, if questions come, will you just kind of shout out?
I will.
Because I can probably hear you. Let me see if I can make this work. Share. Hang on. Desktop. Right. Here we go. This was my main qualification. Hang on. I've got the spinning beach ball of death.
It's working.
Hey, look at that.
Yay.
No, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. There you go.
It's working.
What can you see on the screen now? Can you see
your slide? It's good. Go.
And this is my main qualification for talking to you about space flight. This is what I was very good at school. I didn't excel at school, but I was very, very good at this, which basically led to this. So this was Ad Astra, the book that I wrote in 2017 that I held up. And this is a close-up of the book cover, the other one I showed you. And I just, looking at that cover, it's still for me the greatest book cover ever written. You can just sort of sense the adventure, that that crazy rocket in the background, which obviously never existed. I'm guessing something like that would never have flown. But you've got this young girl and this young boy and this rather handsome astronaut in a silver suit. And I used to stare at this picture and kind of imagine their lives. But not just their lives. If you look underneath the rocket, you'll see some little people. There's a kind of guy in a hard hat maybe, and someone in a brown suit. And I used to imagine their secret worlds and what they'd get up to. I've zoomed in so you can see a little bit closer. And then, that all looks rather exciting. And there's a guy with like a clipboard and a kind of green Jeep. And I always wondered what they did. Anyway, I sort of, over the years in my career, I've managed to meet some of these people. And in fact, this was, this is it. This was me at Tim Peake's launch in whenever that was, 2015. And behind me, there is a rocket. So it's almost exactly the same as that picture. But there we go. Oh, I've got terrible feedback now. Here we go. And even if you look at this picture, my own version of Show Me the World of Space Travel, you look at the bottom of the rocket, there are the little people, just like the little people in my little book. So I've done a little comparison for you. So that on the left-hand side is what actually happened in real life. And then on the right-hand side, this happened in Dallas's childhood imagination. So there you go. So that's kind of my my sort of background for writing this book. So really, it's about leaving the planet and how we are going to do that and how we have done that. And I'm going to share with you a few of those kind of stories. But I thought we'd start just by asking ourselves some of the reasons why we might want to leave planet Earth at the moment. And I'm sure you can think of some. So as I was doing my slides about 20 minutes ago, I was racking my brain thinking why we might want to leave the planet. That was one reason I came up with. As I was seeing this awful video, too much Matt Hancock at the moment, just being kind of weird on television. That was one reason I wanted to leave the planet. The other one was trying to deal with kind of Zoom calls and Microsoft Teams and just the sort of this kind of world we've created for ourselves, which I hope ends soon. So that was my second reason for leaving the planet. Third reason for leaving the planet, it could be something a little bit more dramatic. It could be something like that, asteroid impacts, or maybe something like alien invasion. Maybe the aliens might come and invade us and we might need to leave the planet. That kind of thing was the thing that I had in mind for leaving the planet. But actually, the real reason that we want to leave the planet, I want to take you all the way back to the kind of 1700s, 1793. This was a picture that I fell in love with, well, a long time ago. And some of you I know might have gone to the exhibition at the Royal Museum in Greenwich. They had an exhibition celebrating 50th anniversary of Apollo a couple of years ago called Moon. And this was an etching by William Blake, which I really, really loved. And here we have this young boy, a little bit like the boy or the girl in the book from, my book from 1959. Just that sense of adventure. I want. I love that. I want. And here you can see he's constructed a ladder to the moon. And I think his worried looking parents are worried about whether this child is actually going to go up there. But I think William Blake really captures that sense of need. As human beings, we just love to explore. We have that inbuilt sense of just desire to go places. And of course, 177 years after William Blake did that little etching, of course, we made it to the moon some 50 years ago. This is, of course, Buzz Aldrin on the surface of the moon from the Apollo 11 mission. So it took 177 years from William Blake doing that to actually going there. And of course, we're still exploring space in slightly different ways. And we'll touch on that in a little moment. Tracy, can you still hear me?
I can.
Good.
I can.
I wanted to, because I can't see people's hands. So I thought what we'd do is with your freshers, I thought we'd have a mini astronaut competition.
Perfect. Let's do it.
So what I'll do is get a pen and a bit of paper. We're going to see who is most likely in the audience today have the right stuff to become an astronaut.
Okay.
From our group. So what I'm going to do, ladies and gents, I'm going to go through what I've done. I've downloaded the official NASA astronaut application form. All right. And this is just a kind of base level you will need if you want to become an astronaut. And we'll go through it one by one. And if it's you, put your hand up, and then Tracy will make a note of who's got their hand up. And then we'll see the person with the most hands up for each question will win a prize.
Do you think it will work better if everybody puts their hand up and then puts it down when they don't get the question? Yeah, let's do that.
That's why they pay Tracy the big bucks.
Because I don't get paid.
Really? Well, you should. No. That's exactly what. So if everyone puts their hands up in there, however you put your hand up thing in whatever Microsoft. Do they have hands in Microsoft? Who knows?
Yeah, we do have a little icon. If you put your hand up in real life, then you're just going to look silly. So
yes. Okay. Ready?
Yeah, we're good to go.
Okay. Yeah. So question 1 for my competition. Do you have? Oh God, this could be most people will be no because they're all freshers. Do you have a bachelor's degree in engineering, biological science, physical science, computer science, or mathematics? If you don't have that, put your hand down because you ain't going to space today. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, next question. Do you have, I don't quite understand this one, at least 3 years of related professional experience or a minimum 1,000 hours of pilot in command time in a jet aircraft? Basically, I think that's just, have you had a job for 3 years? Or flown an airplane for 1,000 hours. So if you've had a job for 3 years, I'll take that. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, next question. Okay, this is your eyesight, 20/20 in each eye. However, it can be correctable. So if you can wear glasses, that's fine. If you can have laser surgery, that's fine. You just got to be able to see, roughly. Next question, blood pressure, not exceeding 140/90, measured in a sitting position. Can we measure that? I don't know how to do that. But basically, are you fit, is the question.
We're not losing very many people.
Really? Well, it's the OU Space Club. You're going to assume they've got some fancy pants people. Height, what's that? That's about 5'1" and 6 foot, I think. You can tell it's American because it's in inches. 62 and 75 inches. So basically, are you between, I think that's like 5'2" and 6'1"? Tracy, you'll know because you're clever.
I'm not. I just know I'm too short.
Okay. Official scuba qualification. You will need an official scuba qualification. So if you don't have one of those, put your hand down. What else we got? Treading water for 10 minutes. Basically, can you swim? If you can't do that, put your hand down. Ready? Have you still got some hands up?
We do. We have quite a few.
Blimey. Okay. Here's the final question. Ready?
I'm just giving them a moment to think. There's a lot of hands down, but we still have a lot up.
Okay, well, that obviously for those of you who have your hands up, you will know what that reads. That says, do you speak Russian? And of course, these days, certainly if you're going to the International Space Station, but of course, you know, we're starting to venture perhaps further afield. But right now, if you want to go to the International Space Station, you will need to be able to speak Russian for the obvious reason. Well, certainly the Soyuz, which is the main vehicle to take us to the space station. I know, of course, SpaceX have taken the last group of astronauts up, but even so, Russian is the sort of the international language of human spaceflight at the moment. So you will need to be able to speak fluent Russian. So if anyone's got their hands up, we're going to have to test them on their Russian. Otherwise,
we have 6 people with our hands up.
Find out if they speak Russian properly, and not just like "niet."
We will test them later.
All right, we'll test them later. Okay, we'll make a note of. We'll make a note
I've got who they are.
The words.
I've got names.
Okay, hang on. I'm just going to go through it again. So anyway, that's the kind of basic baseline at the moment of if you're thinking of becoming an astronaut. Certainly in one of the major space agencies, NASA and ESA, example. Well, ESA aren't taking astronauts at the moment. They might be soon, though, I hear. But a bit like the Blake picture of the little boy going up the ladder, we've been dreaming about what it is to be an astronaut for a long, long time. So I'm going to take you back even before William Blake, before the 1700s to the 1600s. One of the great physicists of our age, of that particular time, Johannes Kepler, wrote a novel called Somnium, which you might know what that means. It means dream. And it was about a fantastical voyage into space. And of course, Kepler was this extraordinary mathematician. So this was written in, anno MD, that's 1634. This was written in 1634. And he was imagining the types of people that would best be qualified as an astronaut. And this is what he said in this book in 1634. We do not admit desk-bound humans into these ranks, nor the fat, nor the foppish, but we choose those who regularly spend their time hunting with swift horses, or those who voyage in ships to the Indies and are accustomed to living on hard bread, garlic, dried fish, and other abhorrent foods. The best adapted for the journey, apparently, not my words, are dried out old women, since from youth they are accustomed to riding goats at night, or pitchforks, or travelling the wide expanses of the earth in worn-out clothes. There are none in Germany who are suitable, but the dry bodies of Spaniards are not rejected. So there you go. That is the kind of the right stuff circa 1636. So yeah, we've been thinking about what it would take to go into space and the types of people we should send there for a very, very long time. Now, if you're going to go to space, you're going to need to know a little bit of rocket science for you freshers. So again, I'm going to start in the 1600s. This is some earliest pictures of kind of rocket science that I could come up with. This is actually even earlier. These are kind of rocket animals. They'd sort of designed these sort of amazing things that could propel animals in all kinds of directions. I'm not quite sure how they work. But you know, these are sort of early ideas. So right from the offset, we've been imagining the idea of a rocket, you know, having some kind of combustion chamber, gas coming out one end that would send something else the other end. Here's another wonderful example of kind of rocket science from the period. This is 1648, L'Homme dans la Lune. This is a really amazing book, which if you're interested in the history of spaceflight or interested in the history of science, everyone should read. Is written by Bishop Francis Godwin, who is an English bishop of the period. And he imagined, a bit like Kepler, a fantastical space voyage. But he thought the best way to get into space would be to catch geese, a very special kind of goose called the ganza. And these ganza geese, he imagined, migrated from the Earth to the moon. And he reasoned if you could catch them and tie strings around their legs, a little bit like James and the Giant Peach, if anyone remembers James and the Giant Peach, you could be towed off to the moon. And this is the main character in the story, a guy called Domingo Gonzalez, who is a Spaniard, a diminutive Spaniard, like we saw in the Kepler piece. But it's a really, really wonderful book, and there's a wonderful story. Within that story, there were these great discussions of the science of the day, discussions of what gravity is, and there's this wonderful confusion between electromagnetism and gravity. And you can start to see within the story all these ideas that we take for granted, Newtonian physics, the orbital mechanics of Kepler, and all this new science that was coming out in the 1600s starting to be discussed. So it's a really good book if you can read it. We're going to move on. Another form of space propulsion, which I like. This, of course, Jules Verne, From the Earth to the Moon. This is from the Georges Méliès film, 1900. Somebody will tell me, I can't remember. Early 1900s. And Jules Verne imagined quite prophetically, actually, because, of course, if you know the story, the great gun you see in the picture was situated in Florida, exactly where the moon landings took off from. And the capsule that Jules Verne imagined would take 3 people, just like the Apollo capsule, and off they went to the moon. The physicists amongst you will realize the problems of this kind of propulsion to the moon. The forces involved in propelling 3 astronauts in a capsule in a giant cannon to the moon. Of course, you're going to be raspberry jam pretty soon. And actually, a young kid pointed out, actually, the main problem with this is, of course, you're not going to come back unless there's a giant cannon on the moon as well, which I don't think there is. But I always like that. And I always like the kind of the dancers at the front and kind of what they're wearing. Tracy, maybe one day we should reenact this image.
No.
There you go. And of course, that's the famous picture from the Georges Méliès film of the shell stuck in the eye of the moon. It's kind of one of the great images of early cinema. But since, of course, we sort of dreamed of methods of travel like this, of course, we've since invented the rocket. The 20th century saw this great proliferation in rocket science. And of course, now we have rockets, propulsion engines, as predicted by Newton. Force comes out one end, sends the rocket in the opposite direction. I was going to show you, I've got a little video I might show you of this. I showed you a picture of Tim Peake's launch, but I was lucky enough when I was there, because we were doing it for the BBC. I got to visit the rocket the day before, really up close, so you can get a sense of what it looks like. And unfortunately, I can't share sound, but I think if I turn my microphone towards my speaker of the computer, you might be able to hear it. Shall I try that? Yeah. We'll see, and then you can have a little look.
It's Saturday, December 12th, and getting its final checks on the production line today is the rocket that will launch Tim into space, Soyuz TMA-19M. What makes that so extraordinary is not just that it ferries people into space, but that it does it on such a regular basis. It is so reliable, so elegantly designed that other rockets have come and gone over the years, but Soyuz keeps on going. This is the 128th Soyuz flight. They make a new one for every mission. Building this way is relatively cheap and efficient, unlike the space shuttle that required costly maintenance after every trip. So this is the real muscle. This is the business end, the stage 1 boosters and the stage 2 central core, which all fire and lift off, just like a sprinter leaving the blocks to give you maximum power right at the beginning. When Sergei Korolev first envisioned this over half a century ago, he had no idea that his design would become the workhorse of space travel. But essentially, It is the same 1950s design as the R7 intercontinental ballistic missile that went on to launch Sputnik and the first people in space. Simple engineering that has stood the test of time. The next day, Tim's rocket is ready to roll. It's 6:30 in the morning, it's bitterly cold. They've just opened the doors of the vehicle assembly hangar and they've backed in this diesel engine which they're going to attach to the Soyuz rocket itself, and then they're going to drag it out on its journey down that way towards the launch pad. Here she comes. What a glorious sight! Soyuz, Queen of the Skies. That is proper engineering. Two hours later, it arrives here at the historic Gagarin Start launch pad. So look at this, the train is now moving away, leaving the rocket there, and it's about to go up into its vertical position. When you're sending...
It's quite interesting. It's such a relic of the Cold War, that rocket. It's I said it's in that piece, it's the R7 intercontinental ballistic missile. That rocket was designed to launch a nuclear warhead from what was the Soviet Union over and hit America. It was designed as a weapon of war, and then of course in the late 1950s they realized actually you could stick a person or a dog or whatever you wanted on it and conquer space. It really is a Cold War relic. And it's funny as well, just watching that priest blessing a wall with holy water, just how much the human imagination is wound up in space flight. So when we think of geese pulling us to the moon or animals with rockets attached to us, just you can see the kind of the artistry and the imagination that goes with human spaceflight still to this day. The fact that the Russian priest still does this religious ceremony underneath the rocket every single flight because it's so linked in with our superstition. So that's the Soyuz, still going, of course, but a product of the Cold War, will probably be phased out, I suspect, relatively soon. And of course, we're moving on to other space vehicles. This one, of course, you'll know, this is the Virgin Galactic space plane, which will be taking paying customers up into space. I put space in inverted commas there. I mean, the official definition of space is 100 kilometers, and I think the Virgin space plane doesn't quite go to 100 kilometers, but they kind of slightly bend the rules because there are slightly different rules depending on if you're American or British or wherever you're from about where space starts. I mean, 100 kilometers is really the place where you get your astronaut wings. I think the Virgin space plane goes to about 80 kilometers. Somebody will be able to tell me. But anyway, it's been up and it works and it's fantastic. This is one of the latest astronauts. This is Beth Moses, who works for Virgin Galactic. And I just think this is such a sensational picture. This is her at the apogee of her flight at the top, 80, 90 kilometers up, however it was, just looking back at the Earth at this incredible view you'll get out the window if you've got a couple of $100,000 to spend on it. And that is the view. That's the view that you get from out the window from the Virgin Galactic. I think that's pretty special, actually, whether or not you're officially in space, whatever. Doesn't really matter. Actually, if you look at that picture, if you look on the side of the spacecraft, you'll see pictures of aircraft. And what they've done is, just out of view, there's the Wright Flyer, and it goes up the whole history of aviation. There's the Bell X-1 up to the sort of the Apollo craft, and then the variations of the different Virgin Galactic ones. I think it's a great project, actually, and I'm hoping someone from Virgin Galactic will just suddenly on a whim decide that I must go on it and give me a free trip. And of course, the other one you will have heard of as well, Blue Origin. This is Jeff Bezos's. He's the chap who brings you packages to your door in brown cardboard. He has his own private space company, of course, Blue Origin, which has a different kind of vehicle. Again, this is going to be for paying passengers. Of course, Blue Origin are also designing vehicles for NASA as well, but a very different type of affair. Rather than the space plane, this is actually a booster with a capsule on top. And again, these are both non-orbital vehicles. You're not going to go into orbit on Virgin Galactic or the Blue Origin ones, but they'll get you above 100 kilometers. And of course, as you fall back down, as you go into that sort of parabola, you'll experience weightlessness. It's not kind of lack of gravity. Just that simple act of falling will make you weightless for a few seconds. But actually, this one's really interesting because it's a really, really old design. I mean, we think of Blue Origin, this being very, very new and modern, but actually, if you look, I mean, this is the flight profile of the Blue Origin flight. So you've got the whole thing lifts off, and once you go above the Kármán line, or just before, the capsule motor fires and propels you above, and then you go into your free fall flight, and then you parachute back down to Earth. It comes from a really, really early design. So this was a British project actually called Megarock. And British engineers toyed with the idea of using a captured V2 Nazi rocket, the V2 or the A4. I mean, you will have heard of the V2, I'm sure. This was the real prototype. This was the rocket that really started the space race back in the late 1940s, designed, of course, by Werner von Braun and Hermann Oberth and the German rocket scientists. But the British had the idea of putting a capsule in it and actually putting a human being on it. And you can see on the right-hand side, that flight profile, almost exactly the same as the Blue Origin flight profile. Hasn't quite flown yet. So again, a lot of space flight that we see now or emerging comes from ideas that came from our imaginations, a long time ago. And even if you look at so that's the Apollo 10 spacecraft that's in the Science Museum in London. You can get a sense of it. But on the left is the Orion capsule. This is built by Lockheed. Both of them built by, were they both? Yeah, both built by Lockheed Martin. The Orion is the space capsule to do with Project Artemis. This is going to be the latest project that is going to be taking us, hopefully, back to the moon in the next few years. And you can see it's almost identical to the old Apollo craft. It's actually a bit bigger, but it goes to show that it's basically the most efficient way that you can build a space vehicle for what you want it to do in terms of re-entry and saving weight and size and everything else. So we've come a long way, but we're still borrowing from the past. And of course, physics doesn't change over time. So there you go. That's the Orion compared to the Apollo spacecraft. One of the things that I wrote about the book, one of the great stories of Apollo, just what I'm talking about Apollo, is the thing that really got Americans to the moon before the Russians. It wasn't necessarily the rockets. It was the rockets, but the Soviets had a rocket as well, the N1, which didn't work as well if you know your space history. But actually, it was the Apollo guidance computer. It was the computer that would run the systems of the Saturn V rocket and the spacecraft and actually get us to the moon, the sat nav. And back in those days, certainly in the early 60s, when Kennedy first announced Apollo was happening, computers were the size of rooms. And so it wasn't just we've got to build a rocket and everything else. It was also we've got to shrink a computer to the size of a shoebox that we can fit into a rocket. And it's the most amazing story. And I'm not going to go into it in great detail now, but the Apollo guidance computer is a great story. But I just wanted to mention this. Part of the memory, because of course we didn't have digital memory back then. And so the hard memory was literally hardwired by seamstresses, and it was called core rope memory. So you'd have threads of wire which would go through a metal hole, which would be a 1, and round a magnetic core, which would be a 0. And so those ones and zeros were woven together, actually used by seamstresses who'd work in Raytheon, the company that actually built this computer. And actually this photograph, it's in my book, and it's probably my favorite photograph in the book, because when I was researching this story, there was no photographs. I got in touch with Raytheon. They had no pictures of any of the women whose job it was to sew these computers, to stitch these computers, and to turn the software into actual memory. And eventually I found one. Someone had one in their attic, and I tracked this down. It's a really wonderful picture. And this is it, the kind of core rope memory that's just kind of a mess of wires, but there's something rather beautiful about that as well. It's almost like a carpet, a tapestry. There's a great aesthetic quality to that, and also a skill that we've kind of forgotten about, the idea of sewing as a skill, as part of the space race, we tend to think of rocket science as about nuts and bolts and refined kerosene and everything else, but actually just the simple act of needles and threads. I found fascinating. I found some of these early stories fascinating. So I wanted to share that picture with you as well. Whilst I'm on the subject of sewing, the other great forgotten story in Apollo, and I actually think one of the most important was this. And I don't mean Buzz Aldrin standing there. And I don't mean on the left-hand side, you can see the lunar module there. It's the thing in the middle, the flag. Now, obviously, that's one of the most famous photographs of all time. You all know the picture of the flag on the moon, but it took an engineer to design that flagpole and to design that flag and make sure it all worked and folded up nicely and could be pulled out easily and operated by a human being on the moon. And it's a story that's never really been told. And so I sort of got to the bottom of it. And it was a guy called Jack Kinsler, who was a kind of Mr. Fix-It guy at the Johnson Space Center. And it took a long time before NASA thought to themselves, actually, we need to do something symbolic. What are we going to do? And they had a plaque on the ladder of the lunar module. Should we have a flag? A couple of weeks before, they were like, yes, we're going to have a flag. And we're going to have an American flag because ultimately this is an American project. This isn't about conquest of the moon, but this is to celebrate the American work that went in it. And so he was tasked to design a retractable flagpole that could be stuck into the lunar surface. They didn't know what the lunar surface was going to be like. And this is his original sketch, which I found online. And there's a few things I want you to note in it. First of all, the kind of just how kind of basic it is. It's sort of written on a bit of back of an envelope. And also, if you look down at the bottom, you can see a couple of numbers, and one of them says 550, and there's a dollar sign next to it. So the flag was actually a $5.50 flag that he sent his secretary out to Sears department store just to buy a regular American flag. In fact, they got a bunch of flags, but that's how much it cost. So that flag that Buzz Aldrin is saluting on the moon, $5.50. There's quite a few different stories about who made the flag and did the flag come from Sears or was it part of a government catalog and all these kinds of stories. But anyway, it is just a normal common or garden American flag. And I always really liked that story. Jack Kinsler is his name. He's one of my sort of forgotten heroes of the space race, given that flag has such significance and it's so recognized, and yet there's something so wonderfully simple about it. Food. I want to talk to you very quickly about food. If you're planning on leaving the planet, you're going to need to eat. This is, of course, some of the food, the Apollo food that they took with them on the journey to Apollo. And this is I like to call it toothpaste food, this sort of dehydrated food that you add water to. And of course, it's dehydrated because it saves weight and it's not going to go off, and you can easily mix it in the pouch. Unfortunately, it's not very nice. And if you're going into space for a long time, you're going to need something a bit more substantial, because obviously a journey to the moon, that's only how long is the journey to the moon? A few days there, a few days back, and you're sort of done and dusted in 10 days or so. These days, when we're going to the International Space Station, we're up there for 6 months or even a year. And anyone who's been on a camping trip, you know that if you're just going for a few days, you can get by on basic rations. But if you're on a proper expedition, you're going to need something a bit more substantial, because food, not only does it keep your body going, but it also has a very important psychological component as well. So these days, food becomes very, very sort of quite fancy. This is a sort of bacon sandwich from the Apollo days. And I wanted to show you a little bit of space food history. This is a sandwich that was smuggled on board on one of the Gemini missions. So before we went to the moon, the Americans had a series of missions, test missions called Gemini, where they were practicing docking spacecraft. And the other thing they were testing were different kinds of foods. And one of the Gemini astronauts, Gus Grisham, actually put the sandwich, the day before launch or a few days before the launch, he went into Wolfie's Diner in Cocoa Beach and bought that sandwich. It's a roast beef. No, it's not. I think it's pastrami maybe, or some corned beef sandwich. And anyway, he totally forgot about it and put it in the leg pocket of his spacesuit and thought nothing of it, forgot about it. Anyway, they're in the middle of their space mission. He's a bit peckish and suddenly remembers he has a corned beef sandwich in his spacesuit, so pulls it out. And there's a rather lovely exchange between the two astronauts and mission control about this sandwich, this contraband sandwich that was somehow smuggled into space. Because the one thing you don't want is crumbs flying around your spacecraft, and the sandwich structurally started to break apart. So they were all very worried about it screwing up the spacecraft. Anyway, so it was hastily put back. However, the erroneous sandwich, there it is, preserved in resin in the Gus Grisham Museum in Indiana. So there you go. If you're in Indiana, you should go and look at it. I've in my book, actually, I've put the transcript of the conversation between the two pilots and mission control about what to do about the sandwich. So there you go. These days, they've got around the crumb problem. So sandwiches in space, very simple. Basically, you just use a tortilla because they don't make crumbs, and you can wrap things up in them. Structurally, they're good. They keep everything together, and that's the kind of solution these days for. That's a space burrito. Or a space hamburger. I think it's a space burrito. There you go. Tim Peake, actually, when he was going up, he actually worked with Heston Blumenthal. All the astronauts now, when they're going up for long duration missions, have what's called bonus food. So food that is specifically theirs. I mean, there's all kinds of shared food on the space station, but they can also have their own food. So they'll work with chefs to design the menus for things they particularly like. And Tim was very keen on bacon sandwiches. So Heston Blumenthal designed a very special bacon sandwich and a very particular type of bread that didn't make crumbs, costing a couple of £1 million. Can that be right? Couple of £1 million? I actually have one. I was going to bring it, but I forgot. It's in my other room now. I've actually got one of Heston's £2 million bacon sandwiches in a can. There it is. Oh, actually, that's one of his Operation Raleigh stews. But that's kind of what modern space food looks like. Kind of like canned cat food, but done by Michelin star chefs. So there you go. So food's come a long way. I want to talk to you a little bit about clothing as well. So these are all different kinds of engineering that are slightly off the beaten track, things we don't think about. So things like guidance computers and memory, and things like engineering of food that has to be designed, and flags. Clothes is something that's very close to my heart. I was lucky I helped produce a documentary about the history of the spacesuit, and so I got to visit the Smithsonian Museum in America and got to analyze some of the American suits that were actually worn on the moon. But I wanted to show you, I've got a little video again before we went into space. So this is, I think, is from 1961, when we were thinking about sending people into space and wondering how would we engineer clothing that could withstand the vacuum of space and regulate temperature and extend us as human beings that have evolved to survive at 1G, a very narrow band of temperatures. And of course, we'd been sending people up in planes into the upper atmosphere at that time. So we had a kind of rough idea. But I've got this rather lovely video of a demonstration of a very early spacesuit before we went into space. So I'm going to show it to you because it's funny.
I think we should now consider one of the most important accessories of such a space flight. That is the space suit.
Well, Doctor, that's just what I want to ask you about. This forerunner of the space suit developed for the RAF, which we're now going to see publicly for the first time. Just how big a step forward is it?
Well, there's a very long step between the partial pressure suit, which has been shown before, and this particular suit you see now. Perhaps we can have this inflated and you can see the action. See, space is a vacuum and the suit has to be pressurized.
I think it looks like every boy's idea of a real spacesuit.
Can you move around? If you take it off, one of the most difficult engineering problems in designing such a suit is to provide an adequate range of physical movement whilst the man is pressurized.
Well, I can see you seem to move around all right. Were you uncomfortable? You're sweating furiously now, but were you really uncomfortable in it?
I was a little hot. I think the reason there is that if you are hot and you don't get sufficient ventilation, then, of course, you just sweat and get even worse.
So there you go. That's, ladies and gentlemen, 1957. But actually, even though it's kind of ridiculous, and why would you wear a suit and tie testing a spacesuit? I have no idea. But anyway, it actually it's good. It sort of shows you how a spacesuit works. It's basically an inflatable bag. It is a wearable spacecraft, a spacesuit, and provides all the things that a spacecraft provides, the smallest of the smallest possible dimensions. And of course, this is the most famous spacesuit of all. back to Buzz Aldrin standing on the surface of the moon. This was the A7L lunar excursion suit. I'm sorry, I actually have a replica, a really perfect replica of it, which I was going to put up, but I didn't have time. But this suit was designed, again, if you're going to design a spacesuit and engineer a spacesuit and you don't know how to make a spacesuit, who do you call? And of course, NASA went to the greatest sort of fabric engineers of the time, which were Playtex, who made bras and girdles, because they had a great understanding of new materials, things like nylon and Dacron and neoprene and all these new materials that were coming online in the 1950s. And they also, because they were women's underwear designers, they understood that need between structural support and movement. And so that particular suit was made by Playtex, or a division of Playtex called ILC Dover, and it's the A7L lunar excursion suit, the most expensive item of clothing ever built, and I think one of the most beautiful. I think it's a really extraordinary piece of engineering that is often overlooked when we talk about the engineering of space travel. In fact, there's some photographs I took of that suit when I was in the Smithsonian. We had Buzz Aldrin's suit out, and I wanted to show you these just so you can get a sense of the craft, the needlework, the kind of the nap of the material, because we tend not to get we don't get close enough to these sorts of things, so we don't really see them in context. So if I could zoom in really close, you can kind of see how the material works. That white fabric, it's called beta cloth. It's actually made of a silicon fiber, very, very tough, heat, flame resistant and everything else. And the name badge is just sort of printed on. It's really lovely, but you can see how accurate the stitching is. And if I go in really close, you can see how really accurate the stitching is. And you can see kind of how the fabric has been woven. And if I go in really close, because we took some X-ray pictures of it as well, you can see some of the fibers of the spacesuit, and within the fibers you can see bits of lunar material that's still there. In fact, the suits are still absolutely filthy. They're covered in moon dust, which kind of falls off. But you can see some of the bits of lunar material that are within the fabric. And actually, by studying the spacesuits now, I mean, they're almost like fossils. They're like a kind of a snake skin, a snake that shed its skin, and we can look at the skin and understand how those fabrics behave in these extreme environments. So spacesuit designers now can look at them and see how they fared. Of course, Buzz Aldrin's suit was only on the moon for a matter of hours. As we explore further, if we end up on Mars, we're going to be needing suits that can last a lot longer in much harsher conditions. So new materials and the study of new materials is a really important science. Just very quickly, this is kind of spacesuit number one. This was Wiley Post, 1930 something, who really is the pioneer of the spacesuit, who really understood that if you wanted to explore outside the atmosphere, or certainly the upper atmosphere in the rarefied air, you needed that inflatable suit. And I just wanted to show you that. So yeah, so very quickly, I'll just run through a couple of these are some of Carol Krupp's design of spacesuits from the late 1950s, 1960s. Things like convoluted joints that allow the movement under pressure of spacesuits are wonderful. Not all spacesuits made it, though. Here's one of my favorite. This is the Alan Hazard moon suit idea, a kind of hard suit with kind of bellow arms that you could sort of move around in, which looks ridiculous. And that's because it is ridiculous, for obvious reasons. But they did actually make it, and this is it being tested in the desert. I think that's rather nice. If I was going to explore the moon, I'd want that one, please. Just very quickly, just so you can see underneath the suit. So on the left-hand side, that's what the suit looks with the white beta cloth taken over. And you can see, again, it is just kind of an inflatable bag with the convoluted joints and the cabling that keeps it all together, and the bubble helmet and everything else. And you can see all the connectors connected there. It's rather good. How am I doing for time, Tracy? Because I've got another.
I would say just a couple more minutes, so any of the guys who are going to attend the quiz can ask a question if they want to. So
well,
5 more minutes.
I've got another spacesuit video, but I won't show that video because it's too long and it's lovely. Just very quickly, dog spacesuit. If you're going to space, you might want to take your dog. Here's a lovely Russian dog spacesuit, which are rather nice. And a cat and a mouse rat spacesuit. That is the only cat to have gone into space, and that cat is called Félicette and was launched in 1960 on a French-sounding rocket, Veronique rocket, and that's her friend Hector, the rat. And I just wanted to show you that picture because it took me bloody ages to find that photograph. And I actually got in touch with a guy in France who's still alive who took that photograph, and was so happy that I knew about Félicette, the space cat, and the rat. He sent me this picture and said, yes, by all means, you must publish it in your book. So it's in my book. There you go. Oh, I've got a mini quiz for you.
Okay.
It's really quick.
Go for it.
My favorite space fact is this. So there you go. So that's Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins walking to the van. Now you can see they're carrying their oxygen sort of suitcases in their hand. But if you look closely, Michael Collins, who's in the middle there, he's also carrying a brown paper bag. And my question to you is, what's in that brown paper bag? There's a better picture. You can see behind the brown paper bag poking out. For years, everyone was like, what the hell's Michael Collins got in a brown paper bag? And why is he taking a brown paper bag to the moon? So my question is, hands up, anyone who knows what that is. And if you know what it is, you win a prize.
Okay, so we've got... Oh, I can't let these two answer. They already know. David Law and Helen Rogers.
They know already.
They do. Amelia, let me
Amelia
unmute you.
knows. She absolutely knows what it is.
Okay, 1 second. Okay, Amelia, if you want to unmute yourself and tell us what the answer is.
Tell us, Amelia.
Is it going to work?
Amelia, tell us.
Hi, sorry I couldn't unmute myself first of all.
Okay, what's the answer?
Tell the world.
It was a dead fish given to him by a fishing buddy.
Thank you very much. It's a dead fish, and I've got a picture of the dead fish. There it is. Called the trophy trout, and there's the bag itself. And I actually had a conversation with Michael Collins about this, and basically Gunter Wendt was the closeout guy whose job it was to shut the door of the astronauts. And Gunter Wendt was a German, one of the original German scientists who came over with Dr. Werner von Braun back in the late 1940s. But anyway, he was a great friend of the astronauts, and they used to play practical jokes on each other. And Gunter Wendt and Michael Collins used to fish. And so, as a joke, Michael Collins pulled out a fish that he'd caught a couple of days before and gave it to Gunter Wendt. And anyway, it ended up being mounted on this piece of wood. And it was in a museum somewhere for a long time. And then it vanished, and then it came up for auction somewhere. And I'm not sure. I've slightly lost track of where the.
I believe it was in his freezer for about 20 years until he knew what to do with it.
Oh, okay. Oh, in Gunter Wendt's freezer.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Interesting. I didn't. Anyway, so there you go. So that's my favourite. That's it. Talk over.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to see you all. How do I stop sharing?
You could just come back. That's fine. Okay. Okay. So for the guys watching online at a later date, thank you so much. We hope you enjoyed the talk, and check us out through the forums and all our kind of social media. And we've got loads of brilliant more talks coming up for you. So I'm going to stop recording now. So if everybody wants to wave goodbye to the people watching online.